A very good afternoon to all our participants. We thank you for joining us for today's webinar on e-invoicing under GST. Today we have with us Ms. Krupa Venkatesh, who is a partner and chief catalyst, tax and technology at Consark Advisory Services. She leads the new technology initiatives at Consark across its existing service lines and also drives the tax practice. Krupa is a veteran in the tax and regulatory space and has a unique combination of dealing with the subject both from the regulators as well as the consultant's perspective. She brings in 30 years of experience in the field of taxation with focus in indirect taxes. Prior, she was a director in tax head at Amazon India for a period of 3 years, during which she spearheaded the implementation of GST across 14 Amazon entities. She started her career with the Government of India and then worked with Deloitte India for 14 years as a partner in charge of indirect taxes across Bangalore and Chennai. She was instrumental in setting the indirect tax practice for Deloitte in Bangalore and Chennai. She has recently been on the board of various committees of trade associations, notably as a special invitee to the FICCI Indirect Tax Committee on GST. She is also visiting faculty at IIM Bangalore. Before I hand it over to Krupa ma'am, I would like to take the opportunity to apprise you all that in the last 10 minutes of the webinar, our speaker will host a dedicated question and answer session. For this, you may post your queries in the chat box, which is located on the bottom right of your screen. Also requesting all participants to kindly keep their videos on mute. With this, I hand it over to ma'am.
Thank you, Tanaya, for that nice introduction. Good afternoon to you all. For the next 45 minutes, I will take you through the basic concept of e-invoicing in GST. This is a very topical subject. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concepts. You might have already implemented this for your organization. You might have seen various other presentations, attended various webinars. But for the benefit of those who are attending this for the first time and listening to all the provisions for the first time, and for those of you who have not been actively involved in implementing this for your organization, I will still cover some of the basic concepts. I'll go through them a little quickly and spend some time on challenges and issues which are very common in all new implementations. I have with me my teammates, R.K. Suchindra and Satish Rajgopalan. Suchindra is an indirect tax expert and Satish is a tax technology expert. So all your questions on tax technology will be answered by Satish. So let me first begin by saying that e-invoicing itself is a misnomer in the Indian context. And because it does not mean that the GSTN will generate your invoices. So India has just joined a bandwagon of a number of countries in Europe as well as Latin America, which already have e-invoicing in some form or the other. In most cases, particularly in Europe, e-invoicing was more a commercial proposition and e-invoices began to be accepted commercially by businesses and only then later on mandated by the tax administration for input tax credit and reporting purposes. So e-invoicing is also being used by various governments to plug evasion, and notably Brazil and Mexico have actually seen an increase in tax collection after e-invoicing has been implemented. But by far, the most advanced and most efficient system of matching input credits and e-invoicing is found in China. It's called the FAPIO system, where there is a tight control by the government on taxpayers, where even the stationery to print the e-invoice, the invoice is given by the government. There is a USB stick, and that is called a golden tax machine, which taxpayers have to use to put in their particulars on the government portal. Even the verification of the credits is done online by recipients. So in a sense, the entire process of verification of tax credits in B2B sales is automated. So that's a very advanced system. In the Indian context, this can be seen, or you can loosely call it a second wave tech reform. The first, of course, being the setting up of the GSTN and the e-way bill itself. As with all tech reforms, you will find teething issues on this, I promise you. But I hope that over a period of time, they will settle down. So in our context, we've chosen to follow the path of not having the tight control of providing the stationery and the USB stick, but rather a process of registration of invoices. For now, let's stay with the concept that it is B2B invoices, export invoices, debit and credit notes, but I'll come back to this later. So you continue to raise invoices as you would today, but upload them on an invoice registration portal, the IRP, for generation of something called an invoice registration number. We'll come back to this a little later. We'll see this in a little more detail later on. Now, this is what is referred to as invoicing, and not to be mistaken that the government is going to raise our invoices or we have to raise it on the government portal. For phase one, I dare say this is phase one, only suppliers that have a turnover of 500 crores in the year 1920 are enabled for issuing e-invoices. Now, where suppliers are listed on e-commerce portals and they are otherwise liable to raise e-invoices, facility for e-commerce operators also to raise the invoice on behalf of the sellers. Now, one should not mistake turnover for sales, and the term turnover should be determined as per section 2(6) of the CGST Act, which means that those which are not really recorded as sales, like stock transfers, supplies, basically, stock transfers, nil rated supplies, basically all those which are shown in your table on the inclusions in turnover have to be included for reckoning the liability for raising e-invoice, for the coverage of raising e-invoice. So this is calculated at PAN level, at an all India level, including all registrations. So you can have an STPI unit, you can have a DTA unit, you can have exempted supplies. All this have to be construed. It is not at a vertical level, it is at legal entity level. So even if you have, say, 450 crores of exempted supplies and you have 50 crores of taxable supplies, even then you would be covered under the e-invoicing regulations. Similarly, if you had, say, 450 crores of B2C sales and you had only 50 crores of B2B sales, even then you would be coming under the regulations of the e-invoicing. So there are some categories of taxpayers to whom this does not apply. SEZ units being one of them, the others are fairly straightforward. Assuming that you have an SEZ and a legal entity which has an SEZ unit, a DTA unit, and an STPI unit. Assume for a minute that the SEZ unit has a turnover of 500 crores and that the DTA unit and the STPI unit put together have, say, 100 crores. Though the SEZ unit is excluded from the e-invoicing regulations, for determination of the 500 crores, we'll have to take all the three units into consideration and this legal entity will be covered, except that the SEZ unit itself on its supplies need not issue an e-invoice. Note that SEZ developers are not excluded. It's only the SEZ units that are excluded. So this kicks in from 1st October 2020. This goalpost has actually been moved a couple of times, and now it is 1st October 2020 by when these regulations will come into force. There is considerable buzz that it may be made mandatory only from 1st January. It will be made optional from 1st October, because this is what many trade associations have asked for. But for today, this is applicable for all invoices issued on or after 1st October by covered persons. Note that this is reckoned from the date of the invoice, not from the date of the supply. So you might be raising an invoice for a supply made in a prior month, may say in September or August, or even a half-yearly invoice for the year 2020. But if that invoice is raised after 1st October and you are a covered person, then you have to issue an e-invoice as prescribed. So the legal authority
Just allow us a minute. I think we have lost Krupa ma'am.
So I was saying that ultimate objective is to ensure that the returns are seamlessly populated over a period of time. This may not happen on day one. So I think the expectation setting has to be very clear. And it is also likely to be used by the government as a control mechanism to solve the problem of invoice trading, and also ensure that credit on fake invoices are reduced or eliminated. You will see, as I explain, how this actually provides a complete trail of the invoices raised, and therefore they believe that the B2B sales will be completely reported across the chain, and thereby the problem of fake invoices will get reduced. From an SSE's perspective, it is likely to ease compliance as well as help in easy verification of input tax credits. So this slide actually describes what happens in the e-invoicing process, and why it is so important for the invoice to have the attributes, the 4 attributes, and I'll come to that in a minute. So the taxpayers can push the data in a JSON format, and once the document is submitted, the IRP carries out basically a sanity check and a duplication check, and then it issues the supplier with a response. So basically the sanity check is on the completion of data in all mandatory fields, the verification of the buyers and the suppliers GSTN, validity of the invoice, and also the duplication of check of whether the invoice actually exists in the GST system already. Now, once the parameters have passed the test, then the IRP provides a positive response, and what you get as an output is an invoice registration number. That's called the IRN. It's basically a 64 character hashed value. You get a QR code, you get an acknowledgement number, and you get an acknowledgement date stamp. Now, this is proof that the e-invoice is validated by the system. So the invoice is then made available to both parties in the GST portal. For some reason, if the test is failed, then the reason is given to the taxpayer. So there are certain fields which when I say e-invoice schema, it only means format. Okay, that's the tech jargon for format. So there are minimum mandatory fields, there is 28 mandatory fields, and based on your response to certain segments, another 16 could become mandatory. For example, if you want to generate an e-way bill along with the e-invoice, then 16 more fields will become mandatory. And if it's B2B, then 5 more fields could become mandatory. For example, the buyer PIN code. The rest of the 84 fields are optional. But there are businesses which choose to implement some of these in their ERPs just to use this as a control measure. Very often you find that a number of reports have to be generated for gathering various information. So it is not a bad idea to look at some of the optional fields also and enable them so that reporting is easier. So this is how a verified signed invoice look like, and I'll give you a few seconds to see this. So note that at the very bottom, it has the IRN. That is the hashed value. That is the 64-digit hashed value. It has an acknowledgement number. It has an acknowledgement date. And in this example, there was a digital signature certificate. So that also got verified. But it's not mandatory to upload the digital signature certificate. That's not mandatory. Okay. So what happens if you don't comply? Assuming there was a default in compliance, the rule, that's 48.5, considers a document issued by a covered person without these 4 attributes. That is the IRN, the acknowledgement date, the QR code, and the acknowledgement stamp, acknowledgement reference number. If the document does not have these 4 attributes, then that document is considered invalid. Now, if it is considered invalid, it has a consequence not just for you in terms of a fine, but it also means that the recipient would not be able to claim input tax credit on such invoices. There is a possibility that the government may say that this is not a valid invoice on which you can claim input tax credit. So what actually seems like a very harmless procedure of just, kind of registering an invoice on a government portal now suddenly has a lot of financial implications in the supply chain. So that is the reason why this becomes so important, and it also becomes a self-policing mechanism across the supply chain itself. So there is a fine of 10,000 rupees, which will be levied for each instance. Now, since this is in the context of an invoice, I believe that each invoice can be treated as an instance of non-compliance. So that can be quite a costly affair. So just as an aside, there are 2 views doing the rounds on this fine of 10,000. Okay, so I really don't have a view on this, but there is a school of thought which says that the fine can be 20,000 actually, 10,000 rupees under the CGST and 10,000 rupees under the SGST. But in the case of an IGST, it can be only 10,000 rupees. Well, I don't think it's the intention of the government to make a violation of an IGST nature cheaper than, an intrastate sale. Anyway, we leave it at that. What happens after e-invoice generation? So what is expected is that the details, the complete details of the invoice would flow from the IRP into the GSTN. The IRP is managed by the NIC right now, but they have called for tenders and asking for enrollment of other service providers as well. So the data should come from the IRP into the GSTN. It'll probably come once a day. So in the future it could be real time, but right now it is once a day at the end of the day, post midnight. Now the IRP does not store your invoices. It does not keep any details of your invoices at all. It flushes out all the details beyond after 24 hours. So if you were to, therefore you can't cancel an invoice after 24 hours. So cancellation is permitted, but you have to be mindful that it is permitted only for 24 hours. And after that, none of the details will be available on the IRP. Then one may ask the question, if none of the details are available on the IRP, later on, if an invoice is raised, giving the same details as an invoice that was flushed out, how would the IRP verify it? So the answer to that is that it is verified via the 64-character hash value. Though that hash value is stored in the IRP, and that is used to verify or conduct the duplication check for further invoices. After this, what is expected is that the data flow to the GSTN will result in auto-population of GST, some columns of the GSTR1, and more importantly, it will also auto-populate the customer's two-way. So this can actually be seen as a complete verification of the input tax credit itself. And if this system works well, now for the selected class of taxpayers, the government can actually forget about input tax credit verification completely, except that it should work as it is envisaged. So therefore, this is certainly going to result in cleaner input tax credit registers. Now there is considerable preparation to be done for implementation of e-invoicing, both from an outward supply side as well as from an inward supply side. First on the outward supplies. Now, I mentioned to you that there are some mandatory fields in the e-invoice schema. So the basic verification that has to be done is that these mandatory fields are present in your ERP. Now you can go one step further. You can choose just to implement those which are enough for you to stay compliant, but you can, if you want, use this as a control mechanism and get more optional fields also introduced, going by the assumption that at some point in time, all your vendors, all supplies, all your units will be covered under e-invoicing. There is also a cleanup to be done on HSN, the SAC masters, and the customer GSTNs. Customer GSTNs in particular, because the credit has to flow to the customers correctly. So that's why it's very important to clean up and update your customer GSTNs. There is suddenly a focus on cancellation of invoices. I'm not sure if any company really has a very strong invoice cancellation policy that has been very rigidly implemented. In fact, cancellation of invoices across tax periods is extremely common. And now suddenly you find a regulation which says that you can't cancel an invoice beyond 24 hours. Also, you can't cancel an invoice partially. So if you have to cancel an invoice, you have to cancel it completely. So if you have an invoice which runs into 5 or 6 pages and 2 or 3 items are to be deleted, now that can't be done, or changed, that can't be done. So the alternative maybe is to stick to just issuing credit notes and not venture into the cancelling of the invoices at all. This is seen as a practical solution by many taxpayers. It's also very important to review the invoicing process itself. You may have to redraft SOPs for invoice processing, and there are various modes in which the data can be uploaded onto the IRP. You can go via a GSP or an ASP, you can use bulk uploading. So these things have to be considered along with the tech teams and a decision made. So there will be some things which you can do immediately, some things which you might want to wait till the system settles and then take a call on, but you must bookmark this as a process if you want to drive efficiency in a system and gain the full benefits of e-invoicing. Training to staff, I think, is a very obvious process that one has to go through. It's also a good practice to push back the IRN to the ERP itself for reconciliation purposes. In the FAQ issued by the government, there is a requirement of the IRN to be mapped against the invoice, and the best possible solution is possibly to put it back into the ERP itself. So as I said, many of you might have done a few things just to remain compliant and slowly implement one or more of these features, but I think these are very good to have features. There is always, GST is all about reconciliations, and there is just one more reconciliation that is added to the process. On inward supplies, now this is an extremely interesting aspect on inward supplies. So on outward supplies, there is a clear coverage of taxpayers who have turnover of 500 crores or more. But on inward supplies, anybody, I mean, you and I could receive an invoice which from a person who is covered, and we may not exactly be more than 500 crores, but still, though we are not covered under the issuing provisions for e-invoice, there is a certain amount of check and balance that we need to do as recipients of e-invoice. So interestingly, while in phase 1, the intention is only to cover large taxpayers who have turnover of more than 500 crores, willy-nilly, the rest of the population also gets touched in some form or the other. It's not isolated, because a company with a lesser turnover also could receive invoices from a person who is covered under the regulations. And if that person doesn't issue a valid tax invoice, then the input tax credit is at stake. So what has happened is most companies have sent out confirmation from vendors for applicability of e-invoicing provisions. I'll come back to this when I raise the critical issues or the challenges and open issues. But for now, we'll say that vendors have provided declarations saying that they are either covered or they are not covered. It doesn't stop there. After that, it has to go into updating the vendor master itself for e-invoicing status. And this has to be put in as a practice for onboarding of new vendors. This is an additional verification that has to be done for new vendors. It is absolutely necessary to build in a process to validate the e-invoice records before processing payments to vendors. Now, currently, it is common practice to validate the invoices with the GSTR 2A and checking whether the vendor has actually uploaded his invoice before payment is processed. Now there will be an additional feature of verifying this with the IRN as well, with the e-invoice records also. So the invoice ITC verification process is now two-dimensional. For those of your vendors who are covered under the e-invoicing regulations, the e-invoice records have to be verified. And for those who are not covered, then you go with the regular process that is followed now. But more importantly, The AP process has to be made robust, where you have to bar the processing of invoices without the QR codes or the IRN, which are received from people who are liable to issue the e-invoices. So this is an extremely important process that has to be built in, and the sooner the better. It's probably not a bad idea to review your contracts and to provide for recourse if an e-invoice is not issued by a covered person. Again, reconciliation, we already covered that. Over a period of time, once the system settles down, you can consider a QR-based AP process to reduce the efforts and errors by using APIs. Now I'll come to a what I think is, a very interesting portion of the presentation. Some of these questions that came across our minds, there could be many more, and I'm sure many of you will raise these questions when we open the floor for questions. But a basic question, are exports really covered under the e-invoicing provisions? So I don't know how many of you think that exports are covered, because I myself said earlier that let's stay with the thought that exports are covered, because that is what the portal is enabled for. But if you carefully look at the rules and the notification says that the provisions apply when the supply is made to a registered person. So in case of exports, the supplies are undoubtedly made by a registered person, but it is not made to a registered person, because the person is outside your taxable territory. So can one say that exports are covered under the e-invoicing provisions? What is the intention of the government is not clear. Now, personally, I feel that there is no need to cover exports under the e-invoicing provisions. If you see the heart of the e-invoicing regulation, it is to verify the input tax credit trail completely from start to finish. Now, in export, the input tax credit trail does not continue. So there can't be a justification on those grounds to include exports under e-invoicing. Now, if you look at supplies to exporters, that is from their own input tax credit side, that is anyway covered under e-invoicing. So I can't find a justifiable reason to cover exports under e-invoicing provisions. But having said that, the portal, the IRP, is enabled for e-invoicing for exporters as well. Even if an exporter were to raise an invoice on which he has paid GST on the output tax and claims rebate, even then I don't find it reason enough as to why they should be covered under the e-invoicing regulations and put through this unnecessary compliance. So this is a case where there is a conflict between what is put into practice in the NIC GSTN and what is actually contained in the law. We found another one on credit notes and debit notes. The portal is activated for raising the credit notes and the debit notes as well, but there is no legal provision under which the credit notes and the debit notes are required to be validated. Rule 48 speaks only about invoice. It does not refer to debit note or credit note at all. Now, this is a very interesting thing, because understandably, the reason for including this could be that they result very often in input tax credit adjustments. But tech enablement is one, and law enforcement is quite another. And particularly on debit and credit notes, there is a dependency on the supply chain, on a vendor to issue these documents. And if he were to take a view that I don't believe that credit notes and debit notes are to be included in this, so where does that leave us? So if it is the intention of the government to include exports, to include credit notes, to include debit notes, I think they should make adequate provisions in the law so that the intention is well reflected, both from a tech perspective as well as a legal perspective. Also, you can have credit notes and debit notes which don't involve GST adjustment at all. They can be just financial debit notes and credit notes. So obviously, they should not be covered under this. So these are the kind of clarifications that the government should come up with. On the coverage itself, I found this to be very interesting. The notifications says that 500 crore turnover in a financial year. It says in a financial year. If you look at what GST has enabled, the NIC has enabled for e-invoice generation, all those taxpayers who have had a 500 crore or more turnover for the year 1920. So there is nothing wrong in enabling it for 1920, but what is the legal authority for this? The notification does not refer to previous year. It says in a financial year. In which financial year? Can it be interpreted to say that if at some point in time I have exceeded 500 crore turnover, then I am covered now? Can it be interpreted to say that it is this financial year? Can it be interpreted to say previous financial year? So these are kind of issues which will come up on the ground. And look at a case where a person might not have crossed 500 crores in the previous year, that is 1920, but might have crossed in 2021. So is there a liability cast on that particular taxpayer to go and voluntarily ask for registration? Because that is one of the guidelines issued by the NIC, saying that if you believe you are covered and you do not find yourself enabled, please come to us. So the onus is really cast on the supplier, and therefore how is this 500 crore turnover to be reckoned? It might well, the answer might well turn out to be that it is the previous year, but the government needs to clarify. If not, these are issues which will create huge issues on the huge problems for taxpayers on the ground. Because the tech enablement may be whatever it is. But the officers who are enforcing the law will go by what is written in the rule book. And they will not be worried about what NIC has enabled or not enabled. That cannot be an authority for us to claim that we are covered or we are not covered. So these are the kind of issues that the government should come out with clarification, and not NIC or GSTN. It's the government which should issue FAQs covering these small issues. These issues may look small, but they can actually multiply into a plethora of absolutely unwanted and waste of time litigations. So how often do you actually verify your e-invoicing applicability? This actually flows from the 500 crore turnover, but also from a vendor's perspective. How do I know that my vendor has crossed 500 crores turnover? Very interestingly, you can even come across a situation where on account of a discovery by the government, or on account of tax unearthing, tax evasion, a person can be pushed up and his turnover can be more than 500 crores. Will you deny me input tax credit then? So these are questions which have to be answered. There are no answers to these questions right now, but we must foresee these kind of situations. Also, on the vendor declarations themselves, is a vendor declaration enough to absolve one of due verification? The portal where one can actually go and verify the enablement of e-invoicing is open to one and all. So therefore, assuming a vendor did not reply to you at all, he did not give you any declaration when you asked him for one, then what prevents you from going and checking whether he's covered under the e-invoice enablement? So if this turns out into a litigation and tomorrow you have to provide evidence to the government that you did your due diligence, this could be one of the things that as a supplier, you may have to do this. There is considerable dispute on what requires to be printed on the invoice, whether it is a QR code or IRN or both. So there are two views on this. Since Rule 48 only refers to the reference number, there is a view which says that if I print the IRN, it is sufficient. But most of the taxpayers are going with the view that we will print both the QR code as well as the IRN. But note that since the rule mentions only the invoice reference number, and you do get from one of your vendors a code, an invoice which does not have the QR code, you may not have sufficient grounds to say that I won't pay you because it doesn't have the QR code on this. It still may have an IRN, which may be enough to claim the credit. Well, Rule 48.5, I'll read this. It says, every invoice issued by a person to whom Subrule 4 applies in any manner other than the manner specified in the said subrule shall not be treated as an invoice. Note that it's not saying valid invoice. It is saying that it's not an invoice. Now, supply without an invoice is a far bigger offense than supply without an e-invoice. The issue here is that some very overzealous authorities on the ground can treat this to be as on par without supply, on par with the supply without an invoice at all. Even consignments can be intercepted. To me, this would seem like really a draconian measure, but this is the literal reading of the law. And if this has to be countered, again, it will take some time for the dust to settle on this. But the biggest question is, can input tax credit be denied simply because an e-invoice is not issued, where the vendor is a covered person? Now, we have plethora of litigations under the erstwhile law, and courts have repeatedly held that input tax credit is a substantive right, and it cannot be denied on account of procedural irregularities. Many of you who have dealt with indirect tax for a very long time, not the very young professionals or very young industry professionals, but those of you who have been in this for long, we have seen cases under the erstwhile litigation when we moved from ModBack to SENBAT, that input tax credit was denied because the word duplicate was not mentioned on the transporter's copy. There have been ridiculous situations where the input tax credit was denied because the invoice was not pink in color. I mean, you can Google this, you can search in databases, case law databases for this, and you will find any number of cases. So I don't think we should go back to those days. So I hope that, these provisions do not push us back into those days of, huge input tax litigations. Now, I hope this doesn't happen, but what happens if the e-invoice data does not flow from NIC to GSTN? Now, after 24 hours, all the data will be flushed out by the GSTN, and then what happens? So this could happen. This could happen for some technical reason, some glitch. It could happen, but it is then the responsibility of the taxpayer to check the accuracy before return filing. So till the dust settles on the system, I think it's a good practice that don't assume that everything has kind of flowed through. Please do check. Can an invoice be validated using an IRN? This was a question which came to us from one of the implementations, and the answer is no. We cannot validate an IRN using an e-invoice. Can an e-way bill be generated and then an e-invoice? There's no clarity on this, but it seems to me that that is a difficult proposition, because it is also a fact that in many industries, e-way bills are generated, the goods are actually sent over to the customers, and after their acceptance, the invoices are raised. Now, whether SSEs will be able to continue this practice even after e-invoicing is implemented is something which we will have to wait and see. There is no clarity on this. We will have to live with the perils of partial implementation. It is a good idea to choose a select population of taxpayers and implement a reform as this. You wouldn't want to really experiment with the entire taxpayer population, but it is undeniable that in the interregnum, while this becomes a full-blown feature, the ones who have lent themselves to this implementation will probably face the brunt of testing the waters, so to say. Particularly because, this flowing of e-invoice data is not tested. It cannot be tested under the sandbox environment, and we will have to wait for the D-Day to see as to what happens. In case of, multi-layered supply chains, you will have vendors who are covered, you will have participants who are covered under the regulations, who are not covered under the regulations. So you will have to have different parameters, different verifications for these two classes of the participants of the supply chain. But that is something which I think we will have to live with in the short run. So what to expect in the medium to short to medium term? It's a no-brainer. I think it's only a matter of time that it will be extended to persons who have a turnover of 100 crores, because that anyway was the original proposal, and it's only an afterthought that it's been restricted to those who have 500 crores turnover or more. But when that will happen will depend on the efficacy of the system that will now be implemented. The sooner that it happens, it's better, because it just brings about some kind of a uniformity in the system, and it also is an assurance that the system is indeed working well. It might not be a surprise if they open up the portal for voluntary registration, irrespective of turnover, and that will probably benefit many OEMs, where they have ancillaries who supply dedicated to the large manufacturing companies. Auto industry is a classic example. The e-invoicing as such was always conceptualized to cover all supplies, including B2C supplies. It is not lost on the government that there is huge tax evasion in the B2C segment. And it may not be long before they extend it to everything, but that will require enormous bandwidth, and with the surge in online retail, maybe that is something which will be put off for some time, at least for the next 24 months or so. We may see legal issues around ITC denial for want of an e-invoice. So do we just live with all these things and say, okay, so we will wait and do what, we wait and see what happens? I would say not. My request is contemplate over these issues. There might be many more issues. We've just, put together a few of them in the limited time that we have and pulled out the most important issues. There could be many more issues. Work with your associations. Remember that many of these issues are not great legal issues on which a position has to be taken. We can actually preempt all these hindrances for us as industry if we take these issues to the government through our associations. In my experience, there is openness to hear genuine concerns, and if a clarification is issued on these small issues, I think they will go a large way in actually making the system a win-win for all. After all, as industry, we also benefit from this e-invoicing. And if the government can also benefit with minimum hindrances and minimum difficulties for taxpayers to pay their tax, then I think it results in a much better environment of trust. So I'll pause here and open up for questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for this absolutely wonderful session. We do have a few questions. So ma'am, the first question is, are the IRN, QR code and acknowledgement 3 different fields?
So Satish, would you mind answering this question? I think you're better placed to answer and this question and provide more inputs on this, apart from just answering the question in a yes or no.
Sure. So yeah, the IRN is a 64 character hashed value. The signed invoice would be about 800,000 or even more characters, and that's going to be alphanumeric. The signed QR code again is going to be probably over 400-500 characters, alphanumeric, and the acknowledgement number is going to be a numeric field. So these are separate different fields on the NIC portal. So the reason it's being done is, as you understand, the IRN is 64 characters. It's very difficult for many people to input that correctly. So they've given an alternate, I wouldn't say alternate, but at least a additional field for search and filtering through the acknowledgement number. So acknowledgement number is expected to be about 10 numbers, meaning 10 sized numeric field, so that the search and sort, filtering, etc. gets easier. That's more like a additional field alone. But yeah, overall these are separate fields.
Okay, thanks Satish. Ma'am, the next question is, please help us understand what is dynamic QR code and what is its relation with e-invoice?
Okay, the dynamic QR code has no relationship with e-invoicing. The dynamic QR code is for B2C sales for taxpayers who have 500 crore or more in turnover, and that is to enable digital payments. It has absolutely nothing to do with the e-invoicing QR code, the reference to the e-invoicing QR code. In fact, the dynamic QR code has the bank details of the seller. It's just to enable and encourage digital payments. Satish, anything to add?
No, ma'am, I think you covered it. So basically, the signed QR code is, in technical terms, it's encrypted, okay? And you need to decrypt it or perform a cryptographic activity on it using the NIC's keys. On a dynamic QR code is what you see on various platforms like a Paytm or a Google Pay, etc., where you scan and you get, it redirects you, it gives you information. So what you see on an e-way bill is a dynamic QR code, where you can you get, on scanning that QR code, you get readable information, and it can also redirect you to a payment gateway, as Krupa ma'am mentioned, for digital payments.
Okay. The next question is, a registered taxpayer must print the invoice in triplicate and share with the buyer. So all copies must have the IRN and QR code?
No, if the e-invoice, the rule itself says that the 48.4 itself says that the provision of printing triplicate is done away with if you have an e-invoice. So you don't have to print original, duplicate and triplicate. It's waived.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, we have many questions. I'll try and take, I think everybody wants to get an answer from you. So I'll try my best to take maybe 2-3 more, if that's okay, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the question is, will ITC be denied if supplier has not prepared the e-invoice as per the norms?
On the face of it, yes, because if it is not treated as an invoice, as I mentioned to you in Rule 48.5, it says that if the supplier ought to have issued an e-invoice, and e-invoice obviously has to have these 4 characteristics. And if it's not considered to be an invoice or a valid one at that, then one of the immediate fallouts is that the input tax credit could be denied. We can save this for another day to say that the person has actually paid the tax to the government, so why should the credit be denied? But that's a long-winded discussion. On the face of it, yes, input tax can be denied.
Okay. Ma'am, the next question is, what is the recourse for the recipient if the supplier has not been able to create e-invoice due to a technical glitch? Can the supplier raise an e-invoice later? What is the time limit?
I don't think there is a time limit. There is no time limit between the date of the invoice and date of putting it in the portal. There was, I think, this time limit issue in the beginning, but I think that has now been rectified. Satish, will you confirm this?
Yes, so till about 3 weeks back, it was only supposed to be current day or yesterday, which is T day or T minus 1 day. In the recent upgrade on the NIC, which is version 1.03, it now allows any prior dates also to be inputted as invoice dates.
Okay. Ma'am, do we have another 2-3 minutes? Or
2 minutes. So
okay, 2 more minutes. Okay, ma'am. Done.
So if there are any specific questions, write to me. That's okay. But yeah, we can take maybe one more question.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, the last question for the day is that the B2C customers are already paying via NEFT or RTGS. Then is it mandatory to give digital payment option via the dynamic QR code?
That has nothing to do with e-invoicing, as I earlier mentioned. That's only to encourage the digital payments. So it's out of the scope of this discussion, actually.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. And I think I have many more unanswered questions, but I request all the participants to personally reach out to ma'am. Her email ID is, mentioned in the slide. That is krupa@consac.com. So you can reach out to ma'am and accordingly. Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Tanaya. Thank you all for attending this webinar.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.